You're listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers.
Presented by CMH Heli Skiing and Peak Performance.
The Low Pressure Podcast is sponsored by CMH Heli Skiing, where you can choose from 11 unique locations and experiences, including 4, 5, 6, and 7-day signature trips, the brand new single-day trips. You can do small groups with just you, 4 friends, and a guide, or the private and exclusive, where you get the whole place just to yourself. So find your next adventure at cmhheli.com. The Low Pressure Podcast is also sponsored by Peak Performance. There are many ways to make it down a mountain, but the best line is your line. And the adventure is there, so make it yours. Visit peakperformance.com and get the gear to unlock your free ride spirit.
A lot, we're working with the athletes, we're working with the brands.
Yeah, so you see like this full circle, right? Yeah. And a lot of the photographers that I've had on the show too, they have such a different experience. They see skiing differently because they're not just out there to get clipped, like to go and do a line and think about their skiing. They got to work with all these other people in order to collect this content.
Sure.
But you have to think about it in so many different ways, right? So we are started.
Yeah.
We got her going. Cheers. Thanks for having me at your house, man.
Thank you for having me.
Beautiful home.
Welcome to Tahoe City.
Right on. I drove up from South Lake today, and the tourists are out.
Yeah. Driving like 5 miles an hour around Emerald Bay or something.
Yeah, exactly. All the cars are parked on the side, but the parking lots aren't open yet because they're still full of snow. So they're all parked up along the road.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, this place must be a zoo in the summertime.
Yeah, for sure. Things get busy. I mean, it's beautiful. That's what we live off of, tourism. And, I built so much of my portfolio down in that part of the lake and other beautiful parts of the lake. And so I can't really say anything about it. I think more than anything, I'd just welcome it. Like, it's really good for, business owners, whether it's the outdoor gear shops or state parks, right, or restaurants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody benefits from the tourism. And
oh yeah,
and really, it's like that's the greatest asset. It's public lands. Whether it's the wilderness or state parks.
It's all like national forest around here, right? Like I was just in Kirkwood for the Challenger event, and then I'm like, oh, El Dorado Forest, and then what's a Toyabe Forest, mm-hmm. And then there's just national forest signs all the way around. So I'm like, oh, that's pretty sweet. Because I remember the first time I was here, and going to everybody's house and kind of cruising through the neighborhood, like Incline Village, and then a little bit farther down, and then here. All of these big, really amazing trees are like, there are houses within them. Like, so in BC, where I live, you don't get those big old growth trees with houses around them because they go through, they cut the houses down, build up the neighborhood or the development.
They clear cut the trees first, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So like being around here and seeing these big, gorgeous, like this massive cedar that's just right outside the window,
lucky.
And
we have lots of incense cedars here, and that's pretty special to this part of the lake. Mm-hmm. In the basin, like if you were to go to Truckee, you could see very few of them.
A little drier up there, kind of thing.
I don't know why.
I think because the cedars are really like this cedar here looks like a red cedar.
Yep, they're all incense cedars.
So they are like they need a ton of water.
Is that right?
So if you go like for instance like in the Whistler area, we have a lot of them, but there'll be spots where you don't see any. Yeah. And then if you look at like a ski slope and there's like a natural kind of depression. Yep. That's where a lot of the water, you're going to find big ancient
natural swales. Yeah.
Big cedar groves there because they just soak up all the water and they actually hollow out from the inside. Yep. Like kind of rot out and then hollow out.
Interesting.
But that's some of my nerd.
Well, I'm super into it. Like, I'm actually working on a tree project with Brendan Lagasse, a good friend and educator and a guy I've done a lot of like climate work with. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But we geek out on trees and we're actually working on a tree project for Backcountry Magazine.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's his. I just happen to be helping a little bit with some photos.
Right.
And we also just love the trees here. We're super lucky and we happen to experience them a lot through our skiing because we're going by them and hiking through them, et cetera. And then, a lot of times we're
and when you're up there too, you get like those crazy like 2,000 year old like junipers are like really like mangled.
Yeah, totally. Some of my favorites. Yeah. Those we have some amazing ones in the West Shore. And various spots around the lake, and they're cool because they grow in like the harshest environments, like out of these like granite slabs, you know,
with crazy wind, and they're all
absolutely.
they're all gnarled
up high
and,
where nothing else could live.
Yeah,
They're really neat. Yeah, and then the cedars are amazing. We have some amazing pines too, you know, but the cedars are kind of like, you know, they're like redwoods. They actually have redwood,
right?
And like their bark looks a lot like the redwoods, like armor on the outside, and at least the older ones.
Yeah.
And, you know, some of our state parks, we have some really amazing ones that I assume are some of the biggest in the state. You know, if you go down to like Sugar Pine and Bliss State Park, there's some amazing ones. And, you know, above those places is where we ski a lot on the West Shore. And it's one of my favorite places and where I've built so much of my portfolio. And I mean, I've been to Japan, Kashmir, like you name all these like meccas of like tree skiing.
Yeah.
And I just don't think anything touches our tree skiing.
That's fair. That's a bold statement, but
Yeah,
I think it's not probably to you it's not untrue, right?
Yeah, I can confidently say that, and it's neat because like, you know, we have trees that we can ski, ride in like the gnarliest of storm cycles, but then also on like the bluest of sky days, and like it's always awesome, and just happens to be like on the blue days you also get the big blue lake.
Yeah, right. Like being down here, I see there's just so much accessible terrain. Like just being at Josh's house earlier, he walked out the door. I'm like, look at that. He's like, oh yeah, I take the dog up there, and I'm like, look at this over here. And then just driving along the lake, it's just the access is so much easier than say where I'm at, where it's just steep and. Right, where here it's that you've got great runs, but the ability to get into it is a lot easier. Like just looking, I think Michelle Parker right now, isn't she doing like a full traverse of the lake?
She just did that a little while ago. I think it was 2-3 weeks ago now with Jim Morrison, and I actually helped them and shot it a bunch.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, I shot a few days for them, and I think you'll see something come out soon. And then they also have another bigger project in mind. But
is it like a shoot? Cool. Is it like a story or / video or both?
We shot photos and video. I think you'll see both of them used. We're not exactly sure the home yet or how it's going to play out, but you'll see something. Yeah, and
very cool.
Those guys did it in 4 days, so it's like it was a complete sufferfest. But it was good. Like there was powder, which is like good for soft snow. It was slow for, you know, breaking trail and things like that. Good, just going. A lot of it was just slow.
Right.
They got a little bit of good stuff. Like I met him on the top of Tallac, and we definitely had a good run there.
Did you bring him some snacks?
Yeah, on the Tallac, I actually brought them ham and cheese croissants and a chocolate croissant from the Tahoe house.
Nice.
I think they were pretty excited. Yeah. I kind of helped them along the whole way, like, you know, setting up, you know, caches like of their gear and food and water, all these things, just like try to keep them going essentially. Like, cause they were, you know, it's tough to do in 4 days. It's a lot of miles and a lot of vert.
Yeah.
I think it ended up being like 100 and something miles and 18,000+ vert or something like that.
To circumnavigate the lake.
Yeah. It was a lot of traversing. I think it was a lot of
doubt.
skinning, like versus like, you know, I think if you had more time, you'd do a little more up and down.
Yeah.
You know, and Jim at the end, like, took off his boot that he didn't take off all day the last day. And we were, you know, normally at the stops, like, where he'd meet me to, like, recache and maybe grab some food and water, he would, like, take off his boots. But this is because he had this huge blister.
Oh, no.
It was super gnarly. And he didn't say a word, you know, he's just a good sport and wanted to support Michelle. And
just dealing with it.
Yeah, and they did it. He told me he just turned off that part of his brain. He just had to turn it off.
Yeah.
Because it was so painful.
Just embrace the pain.
There was just nothing you could do. It was like, I'm going to do this with Michelle and finish it. And like, I just got to turn that off.
Crazy.
And he did. Yeah, he's pretty special. He can do things like that. So anyway, that was like a recent project I did with Jim and Michelle.
Cool.
It was just coincidentally, they kind of like last minute decided to do it after we got like a big pulse, and it was just, you know, there'd be good snow coverage on the East Shore where there's a lot less snow usually, things like that. And I happened to be available at home, and I was, of course, I'm super excited to support them however I can. Always just because they're great friends.
Cool mission, and it's like an hour and a half away from home, and you can come back to the kids and go to sleep in your bed.
Yeah, I mean, I started at my house, and then like the first day, you know, I started at Michelle's house, and then I came home and I actually like biked on an e-bike, you know. I have these like specialized e-bikes that I can use.
Yes, I saw them all parked under the house. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like I ran up and like shot them coming out of the woods behind my house, and then like going to like the rim trail, like trailhead, and it was kind of neat. Yeah. And then I just kind of kept doing the same thing, but via car or skinning. Yeah. And worked out. They did it.
Yeah.
Sufferfest. Yeah. And I was happy to help them. It was pretty entertaining to see. Like you can imagine them like in South Lake, they had to like walk a lot of South Lake to like get to the casino where they were going to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like pretty funny. I was getting shots of these guys.
Oh,
like,
they weren't camping. They were like, they would camp a bit, or
they camped 2 nights of the 3 nights.
and then stayed in a casino the other night.
Yeah, because it was just convenient.
What a crazy like imbalance of vibes.
Yeah, exactly. So you can imagine like, you know, all of a sudden we're in Nevada in this casino with like lights and people playing slots and all this at like late at night, and then super early in the morning, like people hadn't gone to sleep or anything, you know?
Yeah, right.
It was like pretty funny shots. And then
they're cruising out with all of their gear and stuff, and people are like, what's happening? What are these guys doing?
And like I'm like shooting them walking there by like, you know, CBD stores and cannabis dispensaries and like massage places and these food places, whatever, all these different things in South Lake that they have that we don't have in other parts of the lake.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty funny.
That's the one thing I did notice the last time I was here. I stayed right on the border road. Mm-hmm. And I stayed like on this side is Nevada with gambling and casinos, but I stayed on the Californian side.
Yep.
In a building that looked exactly like a casino, but it didn't have any of the casino stuff in it.
Yep.
And then I walked across the street. I'm like, this is so weird.
Yeah. State line's pretty special for sure.
But being able to like combine that with, you know, 2 of the most well-recognized and accomplished skiers and whatever, like walking through that that environment, it makes me wonder why it hadn't really been done before, because there's so much of that going on in this zone where it's like, I guess this community just separates from that. Like this is tourism. This is so far removed from our core values, and like what we look for in life is noise and people and hustle and bustle is usually the opposite of what, you know, people in this industry search out and feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
But I personally love that kind of contrast when I look at photos or I like watch footage or any kind of thing. I love seeing the contrast between 2 very different things.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's like why Tahoe's so special too, because there is so much variety, you know, like whether it's the difference between Nevada and California in terms of like the development, casinos, things like that, or also like, you know, the East Shore is very different from the West Shore. Completely different. The rocks are different. The sand's different. The trees are even vary. And so that side tends to be a lot more drier. And like, you know, if you just go over the East Ridge rim there, it's you're in the Washoe Valley.
Yeah, right. I drove
technically a desert.
I drove into Kirkwood from the airport, and just all the way just east side of the lake.
Kingsbury or 50?
Yeah, the 50, I believe.
Yeah,
all the way down, and you're kind of driving through, and you're like kind of deserty zone. It was
totally.
There was snow. It was snowing there, but I was like, oh, there's not much here.
Yep.
And then actually just thinking about it now, driving up on the west side, I was like, big fat trees and very, very different kind of desert wise, and then you know, more forested area on the side. Yeah,
and like, you know, just it's awesome, like, you know, to have the diversity, and like they have their beaches are totally different from other beaches in the West Shore, let's say, or North Shore even. And then, you know, like West Shore is great for sunrise. East Shore is great for sunset.
Yeah, right.
You know, things like that. And I shot the 2018 Powder Magazine Photo of the Year on the East Shore. So it's pretty special to me, you know, place that I've built some of my portfolio, some of my more like famous shots, including one of Jim Morrison, you know, Cody Townsend. Those both have been a lot of places and were a huge game changer for me. So it's special for me. And then, you know, I think it's just different, you know, both are second home markets. So, you know, in terms of like the demographic and community, that's also different. You know,
South Lake people coming in from San Francisco or Sacramento.
Yeah, and like our community here specifically in like this part of the lake is really there's you know, of course there's great diversity, right? But like we have this awesome outdoor community. And when I say outdoor community, like it's not just like the skiers and snowboarders, like there's also like Nordic skiers and mountain bikers and rock climbers, and there's so many world-class ones, but they're also just like, this is just like a way of life people, and like they're not like pros, but like just the pros are also here, but
people that just live here, but do all of those things for recreation because they love doing it, and they love the atmosphere and the vibe, and like that's just the community. That's what it is here, right?
Yeah.
It's a mountain town where you get to do all these amazing things, but you still have to live a real job. Do have real jobs, live real lives,
Yes.
raise your kids. Like there's a church just down the street. There's
That's
a
right.
fire hall just down the street.
Yep.
You know, this is a proper neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah. And we have, a school right on the other side of the street. There's obviously all the commerce in Tahoe City, which is a small town, but, it's cool. Like it's all kind of, most of the reason why people are here and coming here is because of the lake and because of like Palisades and Alpine, like in this specific area.
Right.
And then of course, like there's some that live in Truckee that like go to Alpine and Palisades and things like that, and sometimes come to the lake, whatever. But like the community here is definitely like lake centric and like Palisade centric, and
Like Gaffney grabbing a surfboard
right.
whenever the waves pick up.
yeah, both Gaffneys, Rob and Scott, a lot of history, right? Like things like, documenting, the first like most successful pro skiers like Shane McConkey, and, of course, like even before them, it was Scott Schmidt and Glenn Blake, so many, not even talking about like Olympians from,
Oh yeah.
Down the line, many of which I don't know, Johnny Mosley,
That's why this area is like one of there's like specific hubs in like skiing, snowboarding, right?
Yeah.
It's like Whistler,
Yep.
Little Cottonwood Canyon / Salt
Yeah.
Lake City, Jackson,
Mm-hmm.
obviously Tahoe, like Whistler. You've got those like central zones where people are there's just
Yeah.
a disproportionate amount of amazing humans at the top of their level in whatever sport they're doing or whatever outdoor endeavor they're doing, just happen to live.
Yep.
And Tahoe is definitely one of them, and it's great to see like how many athletes, how many Olympians, how many photographers, how many videographers come out of these places.
Totally.
Which like always fascinates me when I get to have these conversations with them, to see how their town, their environment shapes how they make their art or how they operate themselves within their businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was telling you before, like my favorite episodes to do are the photographers because they all have a different perspective on things. They see what they do a little bit differently, like a little bit more introspection. They think about it a little bit more. And I always like how, like I said, the environment of where they're from influences how their art is.
Yeah.
And like I say this all the time, like you can look at a handful of photos and I can look and be like, Blake Jorgensen took this photo. I'm sure of it. Or look at a Jordan Manley and be like, that's the Jordan Manley, or Lee Cohen, or an Oscar Ender, or Ming Poon, and be like, you have these styles that emerge a lot of time, which is influenced by the environment that you're in.
Sure.
But then also you have your own personal style, which definitely flows through. So I always really like that how all of those kind of integrate.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're like, actually, I want to find out, like, how did you get into this gig? How do you get into this job of like taking photos in the outdoor game?
It's kind of just related to what we were just talking about. All of these people that came before me, the giants before me, and like in my world, it was more of the snowboarders and the skiers. But I certainly found inspiration from both.
Right.
And so, it was the Kevin Joneses, and like so many amazing snowboarders came from here. And, I had just fell in love with snowboarding at a young age. It was like 8 to 10. But like when I was deciding where I was going to go to school, I was like, okay, well, can't go there. It's too expensive, or it's too far from snowboarding. And I was super lucky because like at like 16, 17, I was like, had this epiphany that I needed snowboarding in my life to be happy. I genuinely actually thought that. And I think it was true. And so, places like Boulder were too far from snowboarding. It was further from where I was like growing up in Vermont, for example.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, like, before we get that, so you grew up in Vermont?
Yep.
Like East Coast kid?
Yeah, totally. I grew up in Vermont, Shelburne, Vermont, and then went to South Burlington High School. And my sister are still there. And my sister actually came out here to go to school. And so I had visited, and, being here, watching like video parts, snowboard movies, with these amazing people and heroes. Like I grew up with Rippy on my wall, Craig Kelly, and so many people that came through here. And then, I watched legends like the Hatchet Brothers, and like they were based here. And then they started Standard Films, and they were making films here. And like, so their background came from snowboarding first, and like so many others, right? The Gaffneys were the same way, or Scott, like in his case, like, became this filmmaker. And you bet all those films like inspired me. And I was like, that is amazing. Like because I was just so focused on sliding on snow. I just thought it was just such an important thing of mine. I was so lucky to find something I loved so much that all I wanted to do was that.
Yeah.
So I did like everything I could to just do that as much as possible.
Right.
And so when I went to school, I moved here for school in like 2002, and right away I lived on Incline, that side of the lake, which is now the school is now at University of Nevada, Reno, Lake Tahoe campus. And so, but I was like, even that was like, you know, I had a resort right above me, which was Diamond Peak, which is amazing. It's on the northeast side of the lake. Nevada, people might not know that Nevada has this amazing terrain for skiing and snowboarding. And it's actually the most mountainous state too.
Yeah, that's like I said, we were just chatting with Dyak, who's had his Mountain State filmed the last 2 years, where it's just like a love story to how amazing Nevada is.
It really is. But anyway, you know, for me, I was like, you know, young and mostly focused on like resort riding, and I got really into park riding when I moved here, more so than I was on the East Coast. But like I was always about like free riding. You know, that came from like guys like Craig Kelly, Brian Iguchi. Like I loved his like free riding style.
Have you read that Jason Blem's book that he wrote about Craig Kelly?
He's gonna send me a copy, and he has a book tour here next week.
Oh, sweet. I just picked it up at the airport on the way down, and I read probably about 30 or 40 pages, and it's just getting into
it's amazing.
It's just getting into like the introduction of who he is like as a kid, and it goes really in depth to like his life, like growing up as a kid, and like his family life, and you know that it's so I'm keen on it. So he actually sent me an email. I haven't replied to it yet, but I think I'd like to get him on to chat about it.
You totally should. Yeah, he's on big book tour right now. I was actually supposed to shoot his stop here. But the bookstore ended up arranging something, and but I'm still going to attend as long as I'm here, which I think I am. And so, yeah, I look forward to that. I definitely look forward to the book. Like, you know, Craig was like I said, like literally on my wall growing up. And so it's like a big deal. Terry Hawkinson, Rippy, like I said, you know, those guys took up space from people like Michael Jordan. You know, like I was just so into snowboarding. And so, you know, I was going to school, and I remember like I would load up in the fall. For example, I'd take like 18 credits instead of 15 to kind of stay on track, but still take one less in the winter semester.
Yeah, so you had more time.
Yeah, and so I got crushed, you know, through December, but that was okay because I made up for it in the winter, and I try to schedule like all my classes on like Tuesday and Thursday in the winter, and so I could at least ride 5 days a week. Or at least like the mornings of every day,
right?
Something like that. Like some semesters were different, and then what I did was I worked at the library. I got a job at the library, getting like, I don't even know, like $7.25 an hour.
So you just sit there and study?
Well, I got paid to do my work.
Yeah.
I got paid to do my homework.
Yeah.
And so it was two birds. Like if I had to have, you know, a job and study, like that's 2 blocks of time that are separate.
Right.
So by combining them, that really allowed me to just snowboard more.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was awesome. And, you know, things like that, like snowboarding, it's exactly like how it like dictated my life in so many other ways outside of snowboarding. Like I just did so much, everything to like do that.
Right.
You know, I loaded up on work in the summer so I could ride all winter without working as much. You know, maybe a few gigs at night on the weekend kind of thing.
Right.
You know, and it was always juggling school too. So it was
what were you going to school for?
Business. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in business management and an international business minor. And so, you know, I was kind of always into business because of my dad. He was an entrepreneur and like a successful businessman, but also kind of just like a, you know, the highest person in my life, like in terms of like
influence and
influence and mentorship, and like, you know, when things got bad, like he was like the call. Right. You know, like when I couldn't figure out how to deal with it, like he was the one that like helped me find my way.
Right.
And so he's good for things like that, like higher level issues and thinking, and more importantly, like helping me find the answer myself. Like even if he knew the answer, he wouldn't tell me.
Push you in the right direction. Like if you're walking down the wrong path, he might say, "Hey, take a left here," and then you'll get like, to where you need to be.
One of the things he always told me to do is read more. You should read more, you know, and he was right in a lot of ways, you know, and read about everything. Which, you know, like, for example, I was really into National Geographic when I was younger, and I still am. You know, he was like, that's really great because, you know, you can learn about religion and animals and the environment and science and astrology and, you know what I mean? Like the diversities there, geography.
Yeah.
And so he was like, that's really good. He's like, you should keep doing that. And like, when I was older, like he really gave me a lot of like books on religion and philosophy. It's like super dry, like higher level stuff that like, he was a real intellect and he's into it, but he was right because like the best way to understand people is through
experience and understanding
religion and philosophy.
Right.
Because it's such a driving force for so many. And anyway, yeah, so I came here and I got into all those things and I was snowboarding my brains out and loved it. And I kind of got into, taking some like guide courses and snow science. I started shooting some photos with photographers like Corey Rich. And Corey,
like as the athlete,
an athlete, yeah,
right.
totally, or a model, whatever, for like Ski Lake Tahoe, for example.
Right.
And I did several of those, and I was getting paid to go snowboarding. I was like, wow, this is so cool. So again, like combining those time blocks, so like I can keep the time going and the dream going of like being outside and doing as much as I can. I really fell in love with Lake Tahoe in the summer too, and I got super into climbing. And so I was just climbing my brains out when I wasn't snowboarding. And again, like it just kept me out of trouble. Like, of course it got me into other different kinds of trouble, but like most of it was like, like it was a byproduct of climbing. So like, for example, like there was plenty of like dangerous situations and
right.
Things like that. But like I was able to get through that now. In hindsight, I definitely got lucky a few times.
I think a lot of people that live in these ways, whether they're athletes or they're those people that we were talking about that live in these towns because they want to get after it.
Yeah.
We all have those stories where we're like, oof, like if we all have 9 lives, I probably have about 4 left, to be honest with you. Like there's those near misses and those like, oh, that could have gone way wrong, but those are kind of those things where maybe you get lucky. Or you just realize after and like, okay, well, that is a learning experience right there.
Totally.
Right. Got away with that one.
Yeah. And sometimes you know it, it's super clear. Sometimes it might not be as clear. Like, for example, like you come down from the mountain, you think everything's fine, but like little do you know the whole mountain fell down like an hour later.
Like behind you, right?
You know what I mean? And you might not even know. So you don't even know how lucky you were. There's other times where like, got into an avalanche last winter. I was super lucky and I knew that I was really lucky. We can talk about that later. But so anyway, shooting with Corey Rich and taking some guide courses and getting credentials and getting experience. And then I graduated, snowboarding like 150 days a year or more. And that's like one of the awesome things about here. Like, the season can turn on or October or November, pretty normal, for sure by December. And then, so many years, like my season would go through like the first week of July and we'd end on Shasta. Or other volcanoes,
right?
Like Lassen, and I love that. The Eastern Sierra is always part of the season, and I just like always look forward to getting down there as much as possible. And we get strong locally to do that. Develop our patterns and our good partnerships. And I graduated. Geez, I think it was like 2005, and I was like 22, 23, like pretty young, and right after I graduated, like that summer, Kevin Quinn, or maybe that was the fall, Kevin Quinn who had owned Points North Heli at that time, we had become acquaintances through my friend Kip Garr and some other friends, mutual friends. And he asked me if I wanted to come up and like fuel helis and work for him in Alaska for like 10 weeks. And I was like, oh yeah,
I'm in.
I mean, for years I was thinking about like, what can I do to get to Alaska?
Right.
There's no way. I was this like college kid. I was poor. I had just graduated. I was like working a restaurant job and like a boat pier job in the summer. And, I was living the dream, but like, it's not going to pay for me to go heli skiing in Alaska.
Yeah, true.
And I wasn't like a professional athlete either. I was like definitely like strong and like getting after it and things like that. But like, I wasn't like a lot of the pros from here that are so amazing. There's so many good pros at that time.
It's amazing how you like there are so many amazing human beings, but then there's that next level tier of those people that are just like, how? Like there's so many of the greatest skiers and like there's so many people just in this town and that are just like mind-bogglingly like good. They can ski anything and they can make it look good.
Totally.
But then there's those select few humans that just are that special, and those are the ones that are usually on the other side of the camera. Or they create these stories, and that's what sets them apart, right?
Yes.
And then that's where people like us use our passion and ingenuity and figure out a way to be part of it, right?
Yeah, and so Kevin provided me a way to go to Alaska and to work and make money and snowboard all the time.
And then hop in on spare seats here and there.
Yeah, I remember my first season, I think I got like 30 runs. What? You know, some of those like changed my life, you know. Some of them were really good friends too that were also guides. And, you know, so I was aspiring guide and like that was just part of that, you know. And you kind of just do everything when you're up there. You're just working all the time. It's completely exhausting, but like you do get out, you know. And at that time, I remember like I was also into like skydiving. I'd gotten into it originally to start base jumping because like, you know, I was into the climbing scene and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Places like El Cap and Half Dome. I had these dreams and
that's right around that time where it just kind of really started to take off.
Yeah, Shane and JT were here who were like, you know, people that I knew at that point, but were like, you know, like superheroes essentially. And, you know, and then I got to meet people like Dean Potter and Stanley, Sean Leary, these other monkeys that were like awesome. And like, I'd see them at the drop zone. They were at the same drop zone as me. And we were like even flying together. And I just thought it was so cool and like amazing. And so I was doing it a lot. And I met Josh actually doing that too.
Oh yeah.
In Nevada, Minden. And anyway, you know, I had some close calls for sure. And, you know, in Alaska, I was able to jump out a helicopter, which is just really cool.
Yeah.
But also like typically from really low altitudes.
Yeah, right.
And so
you got to work quick.
Yeah. But it's like amazing. Like that feeling of like going from zero to
just dropping out of a helicopter.
Terminal velocity is like just like the best. It's kind of just like,
and then out of the helicopter too. Like Grant on the episode I did with him earlier was like, one of the coolest things you will ever do is get strapped in and shoot photos up the side of a helicopter with the door open. And I was like, yeah, but I can only imagine like standing there and then just jumping out of one.
Yeah. And, you know, and that was another thing too, is like in Alaska, like it's the Super Bowl, right? It's like the highest stage for like sliding on snow. Like it just is. There's just nothing like it. When it's on, it's so on. Yeah. And like you can hear guys like Doug Coombs talk about it to like Jeremy Jones, you know, all the legends, right? Like doesn't matter if it's ski or snowboarding, like all the biggest legends will tell you the exact same thing. It is as good as it gets in the highest level of snowboarding. And, you know, I got to meet these amazing people up there, like professional athletes, but also like really influential people on me, like Tom Day. You know, like they were making movies, they had a lot of history. They were really great people. Tom's also from Vermont. He's like the coolest guy ever, the nicest, kindest person. And so I really gravitated to those people and their style and their way of life and like, oh, you guys kind of have this figured out, you know? And that really kind of led from like into more creativity things like, oh, could I do this? And, you know, I talked to Corey about it and he's like, yeah, you know, if you like, you know, really want to dive in, like you kind of got to really dive in.
Right.
You know, you got to get a nice camera and you got to be, there's so much to it.
Yeah. So when was it like, is that when you decided like, I want to take some more photos, right? You're up there you're working away and you're getting some photos and you're probably at this point thinking about it, you know, thinking about the process and watching what they do. And you're probably going, oh, that looks kind of cool.
Yeah. I was watching the pro athletes. I was watching the camera people. And then there was kind of a gap. Like there's the business side too. And I didn't really see that, but I had studied business. And anyway, I bought like a first digital camera, like sometime in the mid 2000s, you know, or early 2000s maybe. And kind of just kept going, but they're all like pocket cameras, you know, like that I could carry with me riding, but like didn't also cost a ton of money.
Right.
You know, maybe I even get one for Christmas for my dad or something, you know, like, but like, you know, the camera I shoot with now is like almost $8,000, I think. You know what I mean? Like not even talking about
not the lenses
and accessories and batteries and cards and, you know, filters. It's like, you know, it's just such a different kind of investment that like a young kid like could not have done without like a ton of support or a loan.
Right.
And the last thing I was doing was get a loan because that could have impacted my lifestyle, you know, and like essentially bind me to work to pay off something. And, you know, but of course there's something to be said about like investing in yourself. And so anyway, I just started slow and taking photos like that. And I was just living the dream like all the time and like so often on the line of, you know, like this way is death and this way is like fine. Like just on the edge. And I was so comfortable being there like every day. In fact, I like sought it out, like climbing and snowboarding and like, you know, I became really addicted to like getting comfortable in uncomfortable situations.
Really?
And especially through climbing. And because also like it provided this reward of like doing something you didn't know you could do. And that became addicting. Like, and doing firsts, things like that. Became really good friends with a guy I went to college with named Kyle Dempster. He won 2 PLA d'Ors, which is like the highest climbing award in alpine climbing. And he was a huge inspiration, to get me out climbing, whether it was ice climbing and trad climbing, like whether it was old trade routes or new routes, it didn't matter. Like it was just getting out and spending time with good friends, like doing new stuff, like all the time. New to me, at least.
Right.
Even better if it was new to other people, And so I met other pioneers though, like Jim Zellers, Todd Offenbacher, Dave Nettle. Dave Nettle sold me my first rack. Like I was just so addicted to new and so inspired by all of these people. And they became like mentors and friends. And I was rolling. And Kip Gar became my roommate. And then in 2009, I went to Antarctica with Doug Staup. I was like essentially an assistant guide. And I got to work with John Greiber and Jeremy Jones and Xavier Delarue, and they had this awesome film crew with Guido Perini and then another really talented photographer named Taro Repo. And they're amazing. They had all worked with Zav a lot and brought Jeremy in for this project. And I borrowed a camera. I remember I borrowed like a friend's DSLR, and so I just kept shooting everything.
So you were there to work as like an assistant guide. You're like, I'm bringing my camera for this because I'm going to Antarctica. Like I'm taking some photos.
Totally.
And then from there, you kind of were able to like balance the two at the same time.
Well, some days I got to bring my camera out, and so
Right.
I actually ended up getting some cool shots of those guys. Nothing like Taro, but whatever. Like it gave me a lot of experience. Like I'm watching this full film crew. I'm watching Jeremy and like these Zav, like the top riders in the world at that time for free riding.
And you're almost allowed to be there as like almost as an intern.
Yeah, no, I was totally
right?
working. Yeah, I'm like on a rope with a lot of these guys.
Right.
Like, and I'm like, think of me, I was essentially like a tail guide to Greiber and another guy.
Right.
Hans Solmsen, and who's amazing. He's IFMGA. And, and I was trying to build my credentials, but also like, I really liked the camera. Anyway, fast forward and met Molly, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife. Totally fell in love when like girls and relationships were not supposed to be part of my plan. Like, I was just like so focused and selfish and really focused on progressing like towards that direction of being like, a successful independent guide. And, at that time, like there weren't many IFMGA guides in the US and especially snowboarders.
Right.
And
there's a lot of like bias against snowboarders at that point in time.
Yeah. And the exam was not built for snowboarding. It was only built for skiers.
I did my CSI or Canadian equivalent ski ops level 1 course in like 2004, and we had a snowboarder there who was like a patroller in Big White at the time, and they failed him, and we were like, really?
Yeah, he's really good.
Like he's really
if
good.
He's not passing, like we shouldn't be passing, kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of one of those things where you're like, and you could kind of sense it was because
they just didn't know how to do it.
Right.
They don't skiers grading snowboarders, and like you guide differently as a snowboarder. It's just the way it is. Like the way you move through the mountains is different. It doesn't mean that you can't do it at a high level and safely, and it's just different. And so now, obviously, you see a lot of really successful snowboard guides and split boarders, etc. But I was on course and psyched. Adrian Ballinger had just gotten his IFMGA credential and started Alpenglow Sports. So I was talking to him a lot about it because he was really good friends with Brendan Madigan. And, at that point, like 2009, I'd been to Antarctica. I'd been to like
Alaska.
Europe,
Worked in Alaska.
Yeah, I think I'd done 3 seasons in Alaska at that point.
Yeah.
I'd done over 100 runs probably in Alaska and like climbed Denali and attempted other things like Mount Hunter and like, I'd gone on expeditions.
Yeah.
All self-funded, nobody's paying for anything.
Right.
And it was cool and with friends. Trying to get photos along the way, but it was just part of my life. It wasn't because I was like want to be a pro creative.
Right.
And then
Just enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so, I fell in love with Molly. I was living the dream. And then my dad died. And, he was living in China at the time. Since I was in high school, or since after high school, he had moved there. I think even my senior or junior year, he moved there for business. And, I always thought he was like helping my uncle build up this electronic distribution company. It's called Weltronics. And my uncle was like, yeah, no, your dad doesn't work for me. Like he was a partner and he is like the highest person in our company. And he's like, and now do you own 49% of Electronics?
So he wasn't just working with him; he was like the big boss man.
He was like the most senior because of his age, and like
Right.
he was an intellect. He was a really good business guy.
Yeah.
Super savvy. Like, and I just didn't know, and I was like, what does that mean? Like, and he was like, well, you should probably come check it out.
So you own 49% of like this electronics company.
Yeah, and at that time I had like 200 employees. It was like a really big company, but I was like, what is that? Like, you know, because I didn't know, you know, I was
Do you?
kid, like,
No, may I ask? Like, your dad is Chinese heritage.
yeah,
so,
yeah, he grew up in Hong Kong.
So you're mixed heritage. So
Yep.
do you speak Chinese?
I speak Mandarin for business now, and I speak Cantonese with my family, but my Cantonese is very simple. You know, to like speak with my grandparents and stuff because they only speak Cantonese. They
Right.
grew up in Shenzhen, which is right over the border, and so you know, my uncle was like, "You should probably come check this out," and I was like, "Okay." So literally, I moved to Hong Kong, invited Molly, and I was like, "Hey, look, I don't expect you to come. Like, things are really good though. Like, if you want to come, you can come. You can leave anytime. I'll pay for everything. Like, whatever. Like." And she thought about it for so little time. It was just like, yeah, I'll go. We had been dating for like about a year, maybe
Yeah.
a little bit less, but like things were really good. Like I remember like a few months before that, she's like, hey, like, you know, like, I really like you. Like, I don't really want either of us to like see anybody else, you know? And I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. Cause like when we first met, she had like 3 boyfriends, you know, in a ski town. She's like young 20s and like beautiful and awesome and kind, you know, all the things that like you can imagine, like you live in a ski town, right?
Yeah.
So like
she's spoiled for choice, right?
it was wild. Yeah. And you know, I was like the guy, like essentially I was best friends with like her sister and her sister's boyfriend, who was my roommate. That's how we met. And anyway, now my best friend is my brother-in-law,
Right.
and her sister's still one of my closest friends and the most amazing person, an aunt to my boys now, and kind of history there. But anyway, so we had moved to Hong Kong, and I just got thrown to the wolves. You know, I was just learning everything about business, but at the same time, like learning more about the culture, learning Mandarin.
Because you're in a brand new, completely opposite to what you were doing.
Yeah, exactly, completely opposite. And I'm also like this like country mouse from Vermont, who like, you know, buys local and like, you know, like everybody's like organic this, organic that. Like that's just all we knew in Vermont. Like we didn't need labels. Like we didn't, why would we like taint our food? Like it was like all organic and locally sourced, and you know, we'd trade and things like that. Like you need to go to local IGA or whatever, the store, and get food from local
You get
farms.
eggs from your neighbor or something.
Yeah,
right?
trade meats and all these things like that are just like the way Vermonters live.
And now you're in like one of the most populous countries of all time.
Yes, and you got to check that at the door. Like clean water, clean air, clean vegetables, clean meat. Like, yeah, right. Like, good luck with any of that. Like, you could drive. I would drive myself nuts even thinking about it. And so that was like one of the biggest reasons why we ended up leaving about 5 years later.
You were there for 5 years. Okay, so
Yeah.
dial it back a little bit. I think you're skipping over this important thing. So you just told me about, and I love how this conversation is highlighting contrast like multiple times, because you're talking about like growing up and like pursuing your dreams and like accomplishing these things on your own, self-funded because you love it. This is your lifestyle.
Yes.
And now you have this, you know, your dad passes away.
Yes.
And now you're in the exact opposite situation.
Yeah.
Abandoning, for lack of a better term, abandoning what you've been working for and striving for and living for your whole life. And now you're over in this situation.
Yeah.
How did you end up doing it for 5 years? So if this was so important and so instrumental in what you wanted to do for your life, why did you end up staying for so long?
Yeah, that's a good question, you know, and I think like the original decision to go was, I just knew that if I didn't, I would never know and I'd always regret it.
Right.
So I knew I had to go to at least check it out. And, you know, it was part of it was to honor my dad, to represent my family. I'm the oldest son, so culturally there was some responsibility too. And my uncle was like, I will mentor you. Like, I will help you. I will look after you. You will be an owner just like me, and nobody will tell you what to do. And we'll work through it together. And oh my gosh, she was right, you know, but I didn't know what any of that stuff meant. You know, I was this snowboard run from Lake Tahoe that just climbed and snowboarded and like,
That's moving into,
you know what I mean? Like,
wow.
and like this world that he's talking about is literally all about making money.
Right.
Which I had never done. And before my dad died, he told me like, I didn't know he was as successful as he was. Like, you got to understand that too. Like, I didn't grow up as like this privileged kid. Like, my parents were divorced. Like, I rarely saw my dad, and he gave me nothing. And I didn't think he had anything. And until like my junior year in college, he was like, hey, I'm going to help you pay for your school. And like, it was cheap though. Like, I had gotten scholarships and grants, like essentially could go to school for like $7,000 a year.
Wow.
Not including like, room and board, and books were expensive, things like that. But he started helping me like my junior year. I was like, wow, that's a huge relief. More snowboard money and climbing time, things like that. Like, I was like, this is great, And so then all of a sudden I'm going to this world of like, all everybody cares about is making money and hitting numbers. And, I get totally fed to the wolves. I'm dealing with like Japanese suppliers and Japanese businessmen and Korean businessmen and German businessmen. And, I'm really responsible for a lot of money and people and livelihoods. Directly under me at that time was like probably about 18 million in revenue USD, and then like 30 employees. And that's a lot, of responsibility for a ski snowboard mom. But luckily I had a really good mentor, my uncle, and among others, like, when you're an executive, like, you're also surrounded by other executives, and you're talking to other executives. Like, for example, at the supplier level and the customer level, like, you're only talking to the highest level. And so that really helped educate me, and it gave me this experience that you could not buy.
Right.
And it was cool. And, in the meantime, like, I fell deeply in love with Molly. Like, we were just all in. Like, it was like we left all of our family and friends and the life we knew, and we just forged us together. And like,
and this is in Hong Kong. Was she there for the first?
And then we moved to Beijing.
Oh, okay.
And then we kind of like split time, and I could fly back and forth to Hong Kong like every month, essentially.
Was she in Asia the whole time?
Yeah, she lived with me. Yeah, she moved with me and everything. It was like,
was she able to work as well? Or like,
yeah. So in 2011 or 11, I think, within like a year and a half of being there, she had started getting into like voice recording.
Right.
And then she actually started her own voice recording business, which she's done for like the last 13
like
years.
Voiceover work.
Yeah, mostly in education, mostly Asian clients, but think of like other, she's done stuff for like Disney, whatever. But most of her stuff's like related to education. And unfortunately, in the last like year and a half, like, it's all getting butchered by AI.
Right.
And so I think her business will probably die this year. Like, her numbers will probably be down like 80%, and obviously it didn't help that we had 2 kids. So, she just kind of at like a unlucky phase.
It's like the natural transition of things. Not everything lasts forever, and sometimes things just end.
Yeah. And so anyway, and that job allowed her to travel with me, who, imagine like, we're this young couple, we're not married, but we have like no liabilities at this point. Like, I'm making great money. I'm an executive expat. Like, executive expat life is good. Like, it's soft landing for the most part. Like, stress is real and my responsibilities were real, but like, there was a lot of things that were really nice that were so different. Right. Like, really nice. Like, and so, yeah, it was neat to have, but like not that meaningful to me, to be honest.
Right.
Like, and I was lucky I was able to find like my community of climbers. And so instead of snowboarding like 150 days a year, I was climbing like 150 days a year probably.
And is there good climbing near Beijing?
Oh my gosh, incredible granite climbing. And we were there kind of this like golden age, and we started developing routes, because I'd learned those skills here.
Right.
So we're developing mostly sport routes, but there's definitely some trad stuff too. And like, we were there for the golden age of climbing development there. It was incredible. And I met these amazing climbers from all over the world. Like, it was super normal for us to, go climbing all day and have dinner with like people from 5 different countries. And I loved that. And I missed that. But in the end, like, Molly and I, like, things got really good. And Molly, I remember, was like, hey, when are we going to leave? And I was like, I don't know.
Right.
And she didn't like that answer, obviously. And so, we had to like really, kind of bridge these issues together to like formulate. We had to think ahead, and we knew we wanted to have kids. We knew we weren't going to do that in China, the environment and so many oting other things. Same with Hong Kong, even like Hong Kong's great, but like we weren't going to do that there either. Like, we're Vermonters, we lived in Tahoe. That's where we met. And so she's from Vermont too, by the way. She grew up in Burlington, went to Burlington High School. And it's just, if anybody knows it, it's just so different from Asia or China, especially in Hong Kong. And so essentially we just decided, we're like, all right, cool, we're going to move back. And once I knew we would make that decision, I was like, all right, we're going to go back in like November. I was like, I'm not going to miss another winter.
Right.
And I was just psyched. Like I'd missed, I'd gone down to like 30 days a year, which was fine. I was still going to like Europe and Japan to snowboard in Tahoe. Like it was great. I was living this expat life. I could do whatever I wanted, really.
You're the boss, right?
Yeah. And it was great. Obviously it came with a ton of stress, and which I don't think I could have gotten through if it wasn't for Molly. Like it was so stressful. At times, like I would have broke if it wasn't for her, for sure. Like, and so I was super lucky to have her. And like I said, like it brought us really together, like super close. And at that point, it was just like we were committed to each other, and I don't think anything could have broke us.
Cool. So did you end up selling your shares in the company, or are you just transferring over, or do you have like a stake in it still? And you're like, all right, I've set it up.
Yeah.
Peace out.
So it was a little complicated. I knew I was out, and then one of our partners, not my uncle, another one, was like, okay, cool, here's like a number. And I was like, okay, cool, like, 'cause I'm not coming back. It's not fair,
Yeah.
Like, what are my options?
Right.
So they gave me a number, and I said, okay. And then that guy, shortly after he gave me the number, he came down with cancer, and he ended up passing away, and that kind of changed things and delayed some things, and kind of offered me a little bit of hope maybe too to stay in, or at least stay in a little longer. And eventually I got out. It just wasn't fair to them. I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to be able to, manage my responsibilities.
Right. As an absentee owner, right?
In hindsight, do I think I could have done it? I think I probably could have. I could have done it differently. Even if I had to fly over there like once a month or once every other month, like I think I probably could have done better, and kept it. Hired a really good person to replace me. One of the biggest, toughest things to do is succession planning. And you got to remember, like I was pretty young.
Right. Like you're in your 20s still, right?
Well, I moved there when I was 27, so I was like 32 when I moved back.
Right.
But like still, like when you're 32, like, I'm with like executives that are in their 50s and 60s, or older.
Right.
They have a ton of experience. A lot of them are really savvy and fox, like, and so, yeah, anyway, that was what it was. But it allowed me to like break away clean. It allowed me to buy a home in Tahoe. Allowed me to kind of have some freedom to like what I was going to do. And, a year or two before when I came back, I'd started talking to like Corey, Rich, and Kioki, Flag, Court Levy, Jonah Kessel, like a bunch of these like really important creatives in my life that were like known for photography. Corey Richards, I'd met in China, Jimmy Chin. And I was kind of just like, hey, like Christian Pondella, I was like, I think about doing this. Like, how do you guys do it?
Right.
What do you think? Could I do it? Like, cause I'd seen them, and I knew how they operated like pretty clearly, how their business was run, how they were unique and how they found their niche, and how Pondo did it in Mammoth and Corey did it here. And there's other successful guys here, right? Like like Kioki or Court, and, and so I was like, I think I can do this. Use my like mountain skills, my business skills now, and combine them with creative skills. And like all of a sudden I'm using all these skills that I really love and want to keep and develop still. And I was like, this could be really neat. And like, like I was pretty young, and like, I just loved the idea of working in places and with people that I loved, compared to what I was doing for those 5 years, which was the complete opposite.
And it's like, all right, I'm back to what I was before. And
I could integrate and cross the worlds together. Like so I tapped right back in. As soon as I moved here, I was like, hey, Michelle, Cody, Jeremy, like all these pro athletes. And then I reached out to guys like Darren Ralphs and got closer with them. And like, and just kind of kept going online. There's so many amazing pros here. And like that time when I moved back, it was like, they were all on the top. Like Cody was the top guy. Elise was the top person. Like Michelle was the top person. Jeremy's the top. Like, and Pondo was like, hey, they're going to be the number one success for you.
Right.
You're lucky because they're there.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't really know, And so I was like, hey, let's just go out and bring a camera. They knew that I was a good partner because we were touring together before that, just friends. Yeah. And we're riding partners.
And they're probably stoked you're back and like, hey,
yeah.
listening to all your stories about China.
There was a lot to catch up on.
You're just a bud, you know, that they know they can trust and isn't going to be a liability out there.
That's right. And so that was my in, you know, versus them, like, you know, they probably get hit up all the time by young creatives. They're like, I want to go out. But they're like, yeah, dude, like, I don't go out with anybody. Like, they don't, you know, there's 3 feet of snow that just fell. Like, you better believe you need to be with people you trust. Like, you know, among other things. Like, and all these people have seen things go down even when you're with the right crew, you know, and so they know, like, how much experience matters and trust. And so, you know, it was cool. I got really lucky. They were all like, yeah, Ming, let's go. Cool. And it was terrible, dude. I felt, if I look back now, I think I was so bad. But like, lucky I had guys like Jonah Kessel, who's this like childhood friend who lived with me in China at the same time. He worked for the New York Times. He's this Pulitzer Prize winning journalist multiple times. And he was the best because he could give me this amazing critical feedback. Like, he would just rip my work apart. And it like,
that's what you need.
So the learning curve was super steep. It reminded me of like my first couple years in China where it was like steep, and I loved that. Like, I'm all about that. And it was like, did it hurt? Oh yeah. Like, was it cruel even at times and like broke my will at times? Like, yeah, sure, a little bit. Like, it was like a little disappointing, you know, but like, it's exactly what you need to hear. And like, you learn that like that critical feedback is like one of the toughest things to find, actually. And it comes from usually your closest friends. It's
from someone that they know.
Yeah,
this is what it is. It's like they don't have to worry that you're not going to be friends anymore because that's their job.
Like, hey, dude, we're just like, and
give it to you straight.
Jonah would ask me too, be like, do you like, what kind of feedback do you want? And I was like, give it to me as harshly as possible. And he ripped me apart, knowing that, and like, and he'd also give it the caveat, like, hey, this is just one opinion, you know, like, you know, but like, he was so right about so many of the things, and so I took it for what it was worth, and like, you know, the development came really quickly, and then like from pro athletes, and then, you know, when you work with guys like Jeremy, Cody, and Michelle, like all these people that I was talking about, like they also have so much experience. They're going to be the best pros in the industry. And of course I had seen them doing some of that previously over like the years. Like at this point it was like over 10 years, you know, or more. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like, I'd learned a lot from them. Like, hey, check this out. What about this angle? What about this lighting? You know, the snow over here, like all these things that it takes to create like those portfolio shots that like you see.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many stars that have to align.
Right.
And I focused on getting those because I had to build a portfolio, right? Like Court and all these guys are like, yeah, it's going to take you a little while to build a portfolio. Like, you know, and I remember it was like my second year and I just shot like crazy, and I tried to shoot everything and anything, but especially things that like I loved and around my lifestyle and the pro athletes. And then in 17 is my second year. And I had told Molly, I was like, just give me 2 years to see if I can, like, this is going to like be something I could do. And I won the Pattern Mag Photo of the Year. And then like I started getting a bunch of stuff published. Like these brands that sponsor these athletes that are shooting were buying photos, and like, and I had the contract skills, I had the business skills. So like, it was no big deal for me to like, you know, deal with like the emailing and invoicing and negotiating and all these things that a lot of people, I think,
because you've done it on such a higher
higher level. Totally. I was doing like these deals that were more than my whole income, annual income, you know what I mean? Like in China it was just a different level.
And now you're just dealing with magazine guys who
and
are running like ski bums and snowboard bums who are running a ski magazine, and you almost have like a leg up on them because you're like, well, I know how to say the right things to get what I want, right?
Yeah, and whether they knew my experience or not, you know, didn't really matter. Like I wasn't like advertising it.
No, but you got this secret weapon of knowledge.
Yeah, I was able to defend my position for sure pretty well.
Right.
I was super lucky, and that helped me succeed. And like, and also like learning how to give and take, right? Like there were times where I took less because I knew it would be good for me long term.
Yeah.
You know, I needed this client to build my into this segment, for example, to diversify, or like, hey, cool, we'll grow together. Like all of these business decisions that you have to make, I was so used to that already. And so that helped, you know, it was a crucial part of being a creative that a lot of people don't see. Like all that stuff is definitely where the success comes from. And while of course, like the actual product of shooting is important, like those business skills are equally as important. Like Zellers, he was the one that taught me. And I tell everybody now is like, to be super successful in anything, like it's like 33% of 3 things. And one is like the raw skill, and like, you know, in this case, like being a creative, right? Like your great photos you take or video, whatever it is. And then, you know, operating the camera. And then 30% is like who you are, do people like working with you? You kind person and good person, like, part of the community, maybe trusted partner, all these things, right? And then lastly, like the business skills, like you following up, invoicing, like model releases, negotiating estimates, like working with others, being a part of the team, leading a team, all those things. And so I just kept developing it all, and those skills translated a lot. Should probably take a break for a second.
Yeah, we're good. Finish that point.
Okay, cool. Yeah. And so, I was able to just like slide right in and kind of like it happened quickly. I was super lucky. And it was definitely because of the athletes. Like all my success I attribute to the athletes first. And then beyond that, it was like their brands. And then those brands and those people that I build relationships with would often go to another brand. Maybe it's one person went from a ski brand to another ski brand, or an outerwear to another outerwear, or, from outerwear to backcountry, or Black Diamond to backcountry, like whatever it was, like it diversified. And then, Cliff Bar to Visa, North Face to Visa, like whatever, like all these different people that move positions that enabled me to like open doors that I wouldn't have had.
I worked with this guy over here. I'm going to stay with my people in the new place because this guy works well and he's going to do well for us.
And they know my work. I'm like pretty easy to deal with. I'm not going to like be a dick.
Yeah.
Like I think like, that's like the biggest thing is like don't be a dick. Right. And so, and that goes for anyone, like just being a community member and like, growing up in a place like Vermont, like, you say hi to people as you pass them. Like you're in the city, like you're a weirdo and a complete kook if you do that.
Right.
But like those kind of like personal skills, like growing up in a small town, living in a small town now, like it's the same thing I feel like that has helped me along the way with those brands. Cause like really outdoor industry is also quite small. Like, it's a big, like there's a lot of money involved in the whole industry, and like there's a big network of people globally and especially in North America, but like
it's a small network.
Yeah. And word gets around if you're a dick or, if you're not good at your work or whatever, or both. And so, and I just knew that like, I just didn't want to let people down, whether it was the athletes, cause like they were my close friends. So like I felt this really big responsibility to like get things published of them and like help them and like give them files that they can use for marketing, which also helped build me up. And like, it's potentially becomes marketing for me. And then, get their brands photos of them that they want. So a lot of the athletes would even take a look at some of the files and say, hey, let's take these ones out because like I don't love those. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like we want to represent you the best we can, and things like that. Like I feel like really helped me. But again, like the root of it was like the relationships with the pro athletes already.
Yeah.
And still is today, honestly. But like now I'm super lucky. Like the bread and butter is like these commercial gigs.
Yeah.
Like the editorial is just like a marketing thing. Like, it might be like, I could still make whatever, some decent money, but like, it's not going to like pay for 2 kids and a wife in Tahoe.
You basically do that to have a good time, explore the lifestyle, show everybody, build your portfolio.
Yeah, credibility, and also to like get the athletes out there still. It's a big deal for them.
And then when brands are like, okay, we need to do a shoot with this Jeep at the top of this mountain, or we need a guy, a snowboarder or a skier doing this for a print ad, and you're like, all right, this guy, boom.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and over the years, I was super lucky to get pulled into like bigger projects with guys like Corey Rich and others where like, there's big teams of people and hundreds of thousands on the budget, of just dealing with something like Visit California, let's say.
Right.
And, there's producers, there's drone pilots, there's cinematographers and an AC or 2 and a DIT and like all these different positions that you can have on bigger productions. And like, so I started to get really more experience with that, which was huge. And I was also starting to get like really much bigger day rates and kind of just opening my eyes to like, okay, cool. Like if I'm going to sustain this and keep growing, like this is kind of the way I need to go. And so that got me into like being a part of the role, and then actually got me into like directing smaller productions.
Right.
I'd opened a production company in 2017 or 18 also, and so and that company just rolling now, and I just use my network again. It's like pulling in the subs, like whether they're cinematographers like Scott Gaffney and Tim Manning, who all started out with skiing and snowboarding, but like do everything now. And, other even photographers, and producers. I try to source everything local to the shoot, wherever that is.
Right.
And it's efficient for cost, but more importantly is local knowledge, knowing places.
And support too, because you have the opportunity now to, I guess, reciprocate all that mentorship and all that knowledge and all that learning, because you've dropped so many names in this, and I need to rephrase that. Dropping names may have the wrong connotation. You have given credit to all of these people up until this point. Throughout this whole conversation, you're like, this person and this person, this person all had that impact on you because you were able to learn from them, and they helped you along the way. So now you have that opportunity to reciprocate to these young kids and that want to come and do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think I really enjoy working with others and like having teams of people. Like those bigger budget jobs are much more rewarding for me. A lot of times like the bigger budgets also afford like very specific shot lists.
Right.
Like we're setting up for one shot, and there's a lot of money involved to do that one shot, and maybe you get 10 a day. Like I love that part of the creative and working with clients, and then going down the chain of like creating this network of people around me to support it, to execute it, and then to deliver it, post-production, everything. And so like I love that whole process. It's like you're being a creative, but you're being a business person, but you're also like, there's leadership, there's a team, there's of course tons of personal growth every single time for me, and like in professional growth. And so like I love all that stuff. And then even better if I get to reciprocate and bring in like athletes, that have supported me so much. Like if I can bring them in, I love that.
And be like, hey, guess what? I've got this big budget, and they need an athlete.
Yeah. And so as things develop, and like I became more of like a director and a photographer, and like known like senior photographer, editorials and things like that, I was also starting to like think a little bit bigger. How do I reciprocate like these places that I go and shoot? Like, I so deeply fell in love with even at a young age. And so things like conservation became a really big, important thing for me. And
'cause you're big with POW.
And how do I give back? Yeah. And of course, like I was working with Protect Our Winters, or familiar with them from the very beginning. And then, working with people like Jeremy, the founder and the president, like just really just brought me right into the fold. And, at first it was kind of a little slower, but like now, like I'm all in different capacities. Like, POW is this huge organization now. When I first started working with it, was one person.
Yeah.
And then 2, 3, 5. Now it's probably like 40. I don't even know. It's huge, but the biggest thing was like creating more meaningful work, something that's like deeper for me and important, and actually means something other than like ski porn. And,
has like an impact, social impact.
Yeah. And like, I had seen change, going these places and expeditions like around the world, glaciated terrain. I was like documenting these glaciers and snow melt and higher snow lines and shorter seasons and like all this change related to climate. And I was just asking questions just as a concerned snow slider, like selfishly in the beginning, like, whoa, dude, I'm trying to snowboard more. And like, this is not good for that. So I wanted to learn more about it. And then I learned that like, okay, you know what? Like, I want to be like a part of this solution. Like I need to be part of the solution. And that was huge because it just created a lot more meaningful work for me that like, I think, when my first son was born during the pandemic, I really ramped it up. Like, I want to do something that they're going to be proud of. I want to be able to tell them that I did something for them to make this world better. And I did what I could. And I still feel that way, but I'm definitely more involved, and I always keep it involved, whether I'm negative money on it or not. Like, luckily I've been able to be pretty sustainable with it in terms of like my being worth my time and stuff.
Right.
And it's not usually in the beginning, but it can be, because when you're doing good work, like people tend to want to support that, whatever it is. And so I feel like I've been really lucky, and that led me to some other work that I'm most passionate about now. Like my friend Brendan Lagasse is an educator at University of Reno, and he was given an invitation by a Gwich'in elder named Sarah James, who's also a huge Arctic National Wildlife Refuge advocate. And so the Gwich'in are people of the caribou, and their home is essentially now that's technically Arctic Village, because like, to be recognized by the government, they had to be given a post office and things. But
right.
Traditionally, they're nomadic people.
Of the high north tundra.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Well, I guess of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, but the tundra in the high north, like what's now known as like the 1002. It's the only part of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge that isn't designated as permanent wilderness.
Right.
Because, for example, they're still trying to sell oil leases and things. So these nomadic people, they don't go there because that is the sacred place where life begins. Like that's the exact translation of their name for it, because that's where the caribou breed every summer. And so that's why it's so sensitive to them, and it's so sacred they don't even go there. Like, how about that? Like something for like Westerners to consider, like anybody to consider aside from like native people. And like, there's a place that's so sacred, they don't even go because they don't want to disturb the way of life, because it's so important for them, you know, because then the caribou migrate and that's how they survive. They live and die by the caribou. And so it was so neat because, you know, he had been bringing students up there for about 10 years, and him and I are really good friends. Like, you know, we went to Antarctica together. We've been to Alaska together. We've been all over the world together, essentially, and skied everywhere, and here, and, you know, firsts and whatever. Like, it's all just whatever. Like, he was a huge part of like educating me in reciprocity and thinking bigger and giving back and sustainability and education. And essentially he educated me. You know, we would talk about his work for over a decade on ski tours. While we're doing these rad things like we love so much.
Chatting on the skin track.
Yeah. And of course we were also PAL Creative Alliance members, and we did a lot of things together. Excuse me. But so like we had talked about it for a long time, and like, oh man, it'd be so cool to like collaborate and do this together. And like, but at that time, like later on, you know, he had a kid, I had a kid, like everything's so much more difficult. Like to go to Alaska for 2 weeks without service and things like that, like is really difficult. And I remember like this time when it came together last summer, it came together so quick, but it was years in the making. And so it's a perfect example of like, sometimes change takes so long to happen, but when it happens, it can happen quick. And it was cool. It just came together really quickly, especially thanks to Protect Our Winters. But like, you know, like I said, like we had worked on it and talked about it for years, but like it became clearly time. It was like my time to go. And I got an invitation from the elders of the Gwich'in tribe in the Arctic village. I got another member of the Nupiat tribe, which is like in Kaktovik in the north. They're different. Their diet's more based on like marine, and they're technically like Eskimo people versus the Gwich'in. And so anyway, I had an opportunity to go and work with them, and this guy named Robert Thompson really wanted a photographer, cinematographer to go, and I was like, okay, cool, like. And so that brought me in, and like now I'm on this steep learning curve again, learning about essentially how important the Arctic is. You know, my work is up there, was documenting as much as possible. And prior to going, I was like totally down the rabbit hole and learning from scientists and researchers and things like that. Like all these people that want to go there that often can't go. They can't go, or they really rarely can go.
Can't get access, right?
Yeah, it's really expensive too and far away. So, you know, I was documenting and learning about the tundra and the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge and the Gwich'in people and the way of the Nupiat and the history of the land. And so, but more importantly, what we're doing is with the students, Brennan's created this, because of this invitation from the elders, he's created this bridge from the outside world to the Gwich'in people, or more importantly, the land and the people of the land. And so he and these students are outsiders, and they're coming to the land to learn from the land, learn on the land from the people of the land. And that in itself is so unique and amazing, and some of my proudest work. And I think you might see a video, a film that I make out of it. I'm super passionate about it, but it's difficult to find funding and find the bandwidth in my case. Luckily, I've been surrounded by good people. Protect Our Winters for sure will offer some support. Brennan's foundation continues to go. I've had several slideshows already to raise awareness and money, and that'll just continue. I'll have a show at the Denver Art Museum June 1st and 2nd. And that'll be displaying the work, and I'll answer some questions and talk about Brennan's work and the refuge and how I'd like to see it continue, things like that. Anyway, and so, and then, yeah, I think like that'll just be stuff I continue to do. And then, you know, another thing that was like a big moving point in my life was just like having kids. Like my first kid was born, and like, I remember like when Molly was pregnant, I was still like doing some messed up stuff, you know, like I went to Pakistan and like,
Right.
it's just super, you know, like we're like, you know, roads could just give out any moment.
Yeah. It's not about you anymore
Out
now,
of control.
right?
Yeah. And so anyway, like I really focus on like, all right, what can I do to stay home? What can I do to reduce my risk? What can I do when I get older? And so I actually started selling real estate in 2020.
Really?
Yeah. 2021.
You went into that kind of path.
Yeah. And it's not like you just like start selling real estate day one. It's not like
Yeah.
people see on TV or anything, but whatever. I got licensed in California, and then I got licensed in Nevada, and I started saying no to like, I remember it was like my first 2-3 years. Like I remember 2 years, it was like each spring I said no to like 45 days of work in Alaska. And like, I didn't want to. I love going to Alaska. I love going on expeditions. I love shooting, snowboarding, and skiing like in those places. But you know, more important for me was to be home and supporting Molly, supporting my kids, watching them, like reducing my risk. And, you know, I decided that was something that I was interested in, that I, you know, liked, that I wanted to build out my own portfolio, and like, but also like I could do if I'm old, I could do if I get hurt, and all of which could happen to me any day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just inherent risk. And it was a hedge essentially, and it's been good. I've had a good balance. I've definitely been busier at times than I'd like, but they've been a lot more symbiotic than I thought. Mm-hmm. And saying no to things enabled me to focus more on maybe that business, or allowed me to accept opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise by just being home. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which was cool. So I was lucky just to be able to evolve kind of in a natural way. Mm-hmm. And I really like that. I'm definitely freaked out about AI and what's going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation, and feel even luckier I have another hedge right now.
And it's interesting too, because like listening to you in this conversation is like your life is one of evolution, constant evolution, right? Every, you know, half a decade or so, it seems like you have these goals and thoughts, and then you evolve into this new endeavor, but you seem to have been able to link all of them together, or that's kind of what you're trying to do, is make sure there's some sort of common ground between them all. How can I work with this one but have it still, you know, integrate with these, like, you know, the nice symbiotic relationship with all of these things that you do. But it seems like you're always evolving into learning or figuring out, or like moving into something new, not leaving anything behind, but just like adding it to the bookshelf, so to speak. And you know, with you being freaked out about AI, of all the people I've talked to after this conversation, I think you'd be one of the most capable of adapting to what that change is, because that seems to be what you do. It's like you don't fight it. You just go with the flow, learn as much as you can, and figure out how to adapt it to what you're doing, and how to figure out how to make it benefit you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. You know, I think I've definitely tried to continue building. I'm a builder. Mm-hmm. You know, I want to build myself up. Like I want to build my businesses. I want to build my relationships. I want to build my portfolio, like whatever. I'm a builder, you know, like I've always been like a builder. And so you're right. And I also love keeping the learning curve steep. I love learning. I wish I had more bandwidth to focus on just reading. Like when I was in China before kids, like I was just reading so much. And like, I love that. Now with 2 kids under 4, like, there's so little time for reading. Like I've gone to a lot of like audiobooks like that I can burn while I'm biking or skinning, or, you know, cross country skiing like this morning, or, you know, whatever it is, like, you know, and so 2 birds, right? It's got to be the same thing. Like I learned that lesson, like when I was younger, like combining 2 time blocks is sometimes the only way now.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, in terms of technology and AI, like absolutely. I've always been like someone that I think tries to be an early adopter and be educated on it, whatever technology it is, and understand it. Doesn't mean that all technology is good and all change is good, but like at least like I try to be informed and take advantage of it. And you know, our business in China was so dependent on that. We needed to be we focus on high-end components. And so we wanted the newest thing that could create new development and, meet the solar and wind power demands and like EV car market and home appliances and servers and all these things. Like we had to develop with that. And we wanted to be in all of those segments and some. And so it was about accepting and seeking technology and development of technology. And AI is just part of that. I think we're going to see some consolidation, unfortunately. Like I think a lot of editors are going to lose work.
There was this year was the first year we started seeing a lot of AI graphics in ski films.
Exactly.
And TGR's film.
Yep.
The Bunch movie, Census, I don't know if you've seen that. It's amazing. Yeah. But that's the first, we've seen a first taste of it, and we'll just have to see where it goes. And I think people like yourself, and I would like to lump myself in that, is those who understand and educate themselves as much as they can on what the changes could be are the ones that are going to come out ahead.
Yeah, totally. And I think, there'll be growing pains, but like, just like anything since the beginning of time, like those who adapt the best will thrive and those who don't will fade. It's just the way it's going to happen. And like, unfortunately, I think AI is going to eat a lot of work and labor. It's not just our creative world. I think we're going to look at a lot of positions changing, and
we'll have to see how it turns out. But
it's happening quick too. Like,
it's so fast.
Just like for example, like if I'm a graphic designer or like a animated movie maker or something, I would be so insecure right now knowing that like I think in the next couple years even I'll be able to take all my footage and like chat GPT out like a video, like, hey, like make me a video about this and that. Like, and it's like maybe minutes, and like, of course there'll be some back and forth just like you do with chat GPT now, but think how fast that's been developing.
It's insane. It's like you said, kind of terrifying, but
the technology's already there. It's just not out in like our consumer market yet. Right. And so there's still some bugs to fix, but like I said, like I think in the next year or two, like we have that and it'll change everything, things like that. And there'll be so many things that we can't see yet. But yeah, and so we'll just see, like you said. But without a doubt, though, I don't think like the overriding theme of those who adapt the best will thrive. And so, I feel for other creatives right now. Like,
well, you know what? Like if maybe they listen to this, maybe you can use that role as a mentor moving forward and just share that knowledge and be like, hey, read books. Learn as much as you can. Yeah. And you'll be better off for it.
Totally. And like, with that said too, like even before AI, like I had so many like young kids ask me about like being a creative and shooting, and photographer specifically, and like the work I do. And I'm like, hey, it's cool, but like if you want to do this, like it's because you pretty much like have to do it.
Yeah.
But like if you're trying to like create a vocation, like to like, succeed and like buy a home and have a family, like there are so many better ways to do it than this. And and safer, and like and ways to like be at home and like still ski a lot, and you know what I mean, like you can be an entrepreneur, you can be a doctor, like there's so many things. And
I think it's one of those things, like listening to your story and a lot of others, if you want to make it happen bad enough, you're probably going to make it happen. And I think yours is a really impressive example of that. For people that want to find you, to find your work or learn more about you and like get some more of your story, where can they go? What do you suggest?
Yeah. Oh, man, I'm like the worst at being consistent with social media, but I would say like the one that I'm the best with is Instagram. Sorry about my kid in the background.
No, that's all right. He's it's time. It's his time.
Yeah, so I think like the one I'm most consistent on is Instagram. I am on Twitter. And then, of course, I have my website, mingpoonphotography.com. But I think, you Google me, you'll find me. But like, I think, all the social medias, I have it all. And I guess just like you, I have to adapt and build out things like YouTube and probably Vimeo, which I have sitting on so many things. But maybe with AI, I'll start to really throw out a lot more videos.
There you go.
Yeah. So anyway, and then I think like more importantly, like I said, like lot of this Arctic refuge work. Like I think you'll see some really cool things coming out, including a film about Brennan and his work in the refuge.
And will you be able to get that, like the information through those channels and through your website?
Yeah, I think the video will be a short, and it'll be distributed through people like Protect Our Winters,
Right.
And then maybe even Patagonia, and of course, like YouTube and such.
Yeah.
So yeah, look out for that.
Awesome.
All before the election, probably.
Right. Like, well, that's another podcast right there.
That's right. Yeah.
Right on, man. Well, I really enjoyed this chat. Thanks for having me at your place. And,
Thanks for coming and taking the time.
Yeah,
I'm
man.
I'm honored you asked me to be on the
Like I said,
podcast.
we like when we met in Whistler, I think I just started. I think it might have been like, it would have been like 2013, maybe. Was it that long ago, or did we do? Or maybe it was a couple
I
years
think
later.
like the year I won the Deep Winter Challenge was 2018.
Okay, so it was about
Which was
that,
also that
right.
like big year, because I had run the
Right.
photo. Oh, that's right. Actually, I went there and I won the Deep Winter Challenge in December, and I won the photo of the year. I was awarded it in January.
Right.
Something like that.
So it was a big year. But yeah, so like meeting you then and like seeing you on slope, and I know we chatted a bunch, and I actually followed you guys around a little bit. You were shooting with like Dana Flair and like Tobin, and
Oh, it was so fun. Yeah, I was shooting with Dana Flair. He was like the one that really just was the biggest part. Tobin became like a huge part of the team.
because they just know that mountain so well. They're like, hey,
Totally.
we're gonna take you here. We know this
Yep.
spot. We know that there.
Yeah.
But then like being a fly on the wall, I followed you guys around a little bit, and just watching you go into work mode. That's one of the things I remember about that.
Yeah.
And we haven't connected really since then.
Yeah.
So it's really awesome to come down and like catch up. And
Yeah, that was cool. I think for that one, like I remember like distinctly, I was like, if I'm going to go there and do this, like I'm going to win. Like I made the point, like if I'm going to take the time out of my schedule and like go there, like I'm going to go to win. And came up with a really cool creative with like my mother-in-law and like people around like the holiday dinner table. It was cool. Like it was literally around like the holiday dinner table. And that's right. I flew out on like the 2nd or 3rd December or January after that. And I ordered like a wizard suit.
Right,
and then I emailed like Ian Mack because I knew him. And that's what led to like Ian Mack and Dana Flair and Andrea Byrne and Tobin, who were kind of like the biggest parts of the team, and then Leanne Pelosi. And there's a lot of people that were part of the success, but like I would say like, Ian and Tobin and especially Dana were like the biggest things. And then like I got super lucky. I reached out to like Patrol to get early ups with them.
oh yeah, man.
To shoot like bomb work, AC work, and like I'm literally shooting like pictures of dynamite. Like in the US, there's no way I could do that. Like liability stuff. And anyway, it was so cool. I had a really good time, built some amazing relationships, and like it was like that later that year I went on an expedition with Ian Mack, and I love the guys. I grew up watching him, like some of the life-changing segments.
Legend,
Yeah, total legend. Just amazing, powerful style and so unique. And anyway, and that led to like a trip with Sage and Lusty, which led to other work, and it was so cool. And I was just so happy that I could go there. And I guess like every year prior to that was like always like bad conditions, and we just scored. It was like deep pow.
Yeah, we had a few poor years that time, but it lined up perfectly. And like I said, that's where we connected. And
Yeah.
and harking back to what you mentioned before about the ski industry being, it's big, but it's also very, very small.
Totally.
That's the reason I do all of my episodes in person, because I
Yeah.
think the conversations are better. And I usually try to meet somebody first, and then they know who I am.
Right.
Whether it's just that one little weekend that we connected. So
Right.
when I shot you a message, I was like, hey, remember me from? She's like, yeah, absolutely, man. Come and do a podcast. And then people will let me in. The conversations are better.
Totally.
But then you just kind of utilize that small connecting network.
Mm-hmm.
And if like someone had been like, hey, do you know Mark Warner from Low Pressure Podcast? Yeah, I think I met him in Whistler. He seemed like a good dude,
Right.
So like word gets by quick and goes
Yeah.
by and like travels fast, and
Yeah.
it enables me to come and have amazing conversations like this in your house. And I appreciate you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I love this. Like I just like, I'm honored that you'd even ask me to be on the podcast, but like
Dude, I wish I had 4 more hours. We could turn this
relationships
into
are
a
best.
series, because like your story, like every single component of that story, I want to like dive into each one and like have like another hour of questions, but
Yeah.
we'll have to save it for the next one.
yeah, no. Anyway, thank you for coming. Travel safe, and see you next time.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you.
You've been listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers. This has been a Redmark Media production. You've been listening to the Low Pressure Podcast, the podcast for skiers. This has been a Redmark Media production.